As we're coming into a new year, everybody has the same thing in their mind. New Year's resolutions. What am I going to do? I'm going to change my life. I'm going to lose weight. I'm going to become a bodybuilder. I'm going to win the Olympics. I mean, everybody's got New Year's resolutions of things that they're not going to do in February or March, but they feel good to think about in January, right? Makes you feel better. So moving into that time, I want to do a bit of a reset, and we are actually going to tackle worldview. What is worldview? What is your worldview? What does that even mean? And once we establish what a Christian worldview is built on and what it should look like, we're actually going to dive into social issues. I'm going to talk about how, as believers, do we handle the abortion issue? How, as believers, should we look at politics? I'm going to tell you who to vote for, but I'm going to tell you as a believer how you ought to look at the grand scheme and see it as a believer. I'm going to talk about gender issues from a biblical worldview. Can you believe it? I'm going to talk about the things that our society is battling with, because if you've never stopped and thought through how you should think, I'm not going to tell you what to think. I'm going to tell you how you should approach this and think about it as a believer. So I was going to get into worldview today, and I'm writing all these notes, and I'm like, man, this is really good, really good. And then I thought, there's a problem with starting at worldview. I can't start there. I have to start with the identity of God. Because if I'm going to tell you that your worldview should be built on Him, you're going to need to know Him, right? Because when a guy shows up at my door with a clipboard, I don't know him. I'm closing the door. Telemarketers, you need to know something about the character of the God I'm asking you to build your worldview around. So we're going to start there. And there's a good chance I'm not going to get through just the attributes of God today. Let me start with a couple of scriptures, okay? Isaiah 26, let's start there. It says, you keep him in perfect peace whose mind is stayed on you because he trusts in you. This verse is saying that your life can be lived in peace, not necessarily peace in the details, like you might have a boss who's not nice. You might have kids who are a handful. You might have relationship issues or financial trouble, but you can live in the storm like Jesus did, sleeping in the boat. If your mind is stayed on him. Why? Because you're trusting in something bigger than all the things you fear. Okay? And fear will demand that you grab control. And when you start grabbing control, you will find how little you have. And there's no peace there. All right? Romans 1:18 through 23. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth. Does that mean that people that don't live for him are pushing him down? Like they actually know he's there? I'm suggesting the answer to that is yes. And I think a really good proof of that is if I lovingly approach someone whose life is living like hell, and I say, there's a better way than this. There's life. A lot of times they'll get mad. And the reason they'll get mad is because they've worked incredibly hard to come to a place where they feel as though how they're living is okay. And why have they had to work so hard to come to that place? Because God has put eternity into the heart of man. Man knows that there's a right and wrong. And when I create work again, that makes people mad. If I'm painting the wall and my kid comes up and says, hey, can I play Minecraft with his hand on the wall? I get mad because now I have to do work again. That's how we are as humans. We want to feel like everything's fine, and when somebody upsets that, it makes us mad. So who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth. For what can be known about God is plain to them because God has shown it to them. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world in the things that have been made. So they are without excuse. For although they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks to him, but they became futile in their thinking, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Claiming to be wise, they became fools. God has said of himself that he can be known and that he wants to be known by us. And when we choose to not know him, we become fools. And many times we believe we're wise, but we become fools. Let me just tell you something I've learned in talking with people about social issues and about faith. The argument always seems very complicated. I can tell you that it is very simple. It's very simple. We as human beings are selfish. That's pretty much the half of the story. We're selfish. We want things, and we find a way to make that okay. No criminal in doing his crime understands the depth of the sin he's committing. Many times they will take people who have done egregious things and they will cause them to go back through the story years later to help them realize how deeply dark their actions were, because it's a part of walking away from it and becoming something different. You have got to know who you really are. And they exchanged the glory of a mortal God for images resembling mortal man and birds and animals and creeping things. I believe that man is the center right now of faith. This world is desperately looking for a God that will tick off nobody and will say everything is just fine as long as you don't kill puppies or abuse the environment. And I'm not saying either of those are great. Okay, I think you got me, but I mean, this world is also like looking for reasons to take you wrong. Okay? So we have to look like Jesus. So I want to look at God is, and we're going to fill in the blanks. Ironically, this may be the most complete statement we could ever make about God. God is. This is actually the way he chose to describe himself when Moses asked him who he was or what his name was. God is so completely everything that to say anything more than this is to actually limit who he is. He simply is. To say that he used to be or he will be, it almost diminishes it some way. This is the way he described himself 3,600 years ago to a man named Moses at a burning bush. So let's begin into the attributes of God. God is infinite. Now there's going to be multiple times where I say, okay, time out. You think you understand this, but you don't. It's bigger than what your brain can think of as infinite. God is before all things. His word doesn't say he was before all things. Can anyone think of why God would talk about himself always in a present tense, never in a past? He says, who was and is to come. That's an angel talking about God, but an angel's a created being. God never talks about himself outside of present tense because he doesn't live inside of time. Does that make sense? He simply is. All of time and space and energy and everything we live inside of is something he made that he can hold in his hand. He's not gauged by time. He's not gauged by time at all. In order to be measurable, an item must have limits, boundaries, or a beginning and an end. Try to think of something you can measure that doesn't have a beginning or an end or limits. If it doesn't have limits, it can't be measured. And that's why he's infinite, not finite. Immutable, this word means unstoppable, not changeable. I am changed. We are changed by something greater than us, right? If I encounter a social issue, let's say I go to a country where there's immense poverty and people have no food, and they go into a small community market and there's just nothing, and they have to walk miles for dirty water, and children die because there's no food. I will never walk into Walmart and feel the same again, because I've been changed by something bigger than me. Having children changes you because it's something bigger than you. It will outlast your life, and it will make things happen that you can't control. He has no such thing by which to be changed. God is unchangeable because there's nothing bigger than him that could possibly change him. Have you ever stopped to consider that the scariest things that you fear are small to him? There is nothing God fears. As a human, that is almost impossible to fathom. That there could be a God who fears nothing. Again, fear has to do with control. And when you know your life sits in the hands of the one who owns control, there is no need to fear. Self-sufficient. The God who made the world and everything in it, being Lord of heaven and earth, does not live in temples made by man, nor is he served by human hands, as though he needed anything, since he himself gives to all mankind life and breath and everything. Acts 17. This verse directly precedes the one I quote all the time. And he made from one man every nation to dwell on the earth, and he determined allotted times and the boundaries of their dwelling place in such a way that they would come to moments where they grope for him, and he's waiting there for them. It's Paul talking to a secular society saying, let me tell you about this unknown God that you have a shrine to. He's your creator, and he loves you, and he's waiting for you to grope for him, to reach for him in troubled times, and he's waiting for you there. He's waiting for you there. God does not need this world to like him. One of the big things I hear a lot is, the God of the Old Testament is brutal and unfair, and he's a murdering ogre. That opinion does not change him at all. That's a human world who can't know an awful lot, passing judgment on a God who sees every atom of every life all at the same time. I once had someone say, if I were an all-knowing, all-loving God, I would have made a different decision. And I said, do you realize what you are saying? If I knew all the things I don't know, I would make a different decision based on what I don't know. Okay. Can't get into politics today. Omnipotent. The next three are going to start with the prefix omni, which means all. Which is funny because Chrysler once named a small car an Omni, and it was much less than everything. All right. Omnipotent. Omnipotent simply means that he is all-powerful. Every bit of power there is in the world is his. Now, there's a common worldview that believes that good and evil are equal and opposite. That is so far from reality that it's immeasurably far from reality. God is the creator of all things. In fact, Paul in the New Testament writes, I am convinced that nothing can separate us from the love of Christ. And he says, height and depth, things present, things to come, angels, demons, nor any other created thing. You know the devil's a created being? We won't fight him forever. Death is part of creation. We won't fight it forever. He owns all the power there is. And every decision is his to make if he wants. Omniscient. This simply means all-knowing. It says, remember the former things, the things of old. For I am God and there is no other. I am God and there is none like me, declaring the end from the beginning and from ancient times things not yet done, saying, my counsel shall stand and I will accomplish all my purpose. Isaiah 46, 9 and 10. Stop and think of what he's saying. I declare the end from the beginning. What he's saying is that he can stand there and say, that right there is the beginning. That is the end. And from the beginning, I see the end. And from the end, I see the beginning. One of the most amazing realizations for me in this is that on the day you commit the worst sin of your life, on that very day, God can see the day that your heart repents of that sin. That level of grace is piercing, is piercing. He knows your heart. He knows what you're made of, and he loves you that deeply. His word says that while we were yet sinners, he died for us. While we were yet sinners. Not once we had repented, but when we were still enemies of him, he chased us and paid for us and calls to us. Omnipresent. What does that mean? It means there is not a place where he is not. The word says that in him we live and move and have our being. I'm going to suggest this. I've mentioned the scripture before that says of Jesus, all things are held together by the word of his power. All things are held together by the word of his power. I exist because his will allows me to exist. All he has to do is stop willing that this all exists, and it doesn't. So can there be a place, a created thing, where his will is not? There can't be. Because its very existence is held together by the power of his will. That's amazing. A lot of times I'll think, there's not a place on the floor of the ocean where he doesn't know how the grains of sand are arranged. There's not a place in the universe that he doesn't know what it's like to look our way from that place. He knows what it is to stand on the planets in our solar system. In fact, he made them. This is so far beyond anything we can really understand. He's wise. On this one, I want to make a real clear distinction between two words: knowledge and wisdom. Okay? Knowledge is the acquiring of information, the acquiring of things that are true and accurate. I can know a lot of things, but it doesn't mean I will ever make a single good decision. Wisdom is the ability to make correct judgments. I think for a lot of my life, I thought of Solomon as the smartest man ever to live. He may not have been, but God gave him the ability to make correct decisions in governing Israel that has never had an equal. Wisdom isn't knowing things. Wisdom is the ability to make the right decision. Now, if God is wisdom, does it stand to reason that he could never have made a decision that wasn't right? Be really careful that you don't see God through human eyes. God isn't a guy who's really nice and gracious when he screws up. He's not a guy who's surprised at your loss of a job or that you would do something so bad. God cannot be surprised. He's everywhere, and he knows everything, and every decision he ever makes is right. Have you ever wondered why it says that God created man and man came to a place where all that was in his heart all day long was wickedness? And it said God regretted that he had made man. I think the pain that he felt in watching mankind walk away from him was horrid. But his creation of them, it does not say that it was a wrong choice. It was just that painful that he felt regret that he had to even watch where they had gone. Faithful, infinitely and unchangeably true. That definition might seem a little odd for the word faithful. Infinitely and unchangeably true. So I want to ask you this. When I think of the word faithful, I think of a marriage, right? Where a husband and wife, they're faithful to one another. Their love is for one another. They're not out cheating. They're not out like whatever, taking advantage of each other. They're like, one of them hides all the money and the other one thinks they're poor and the other one then he bails out and he takes all the money. I'm going to suggest this. To be faithful is to uphold who you are. If you are not honest, you can be faithful to that. Living who you are. To be unfaithful often is simply being honest. Being unfaithful is often simply just being honest. God is always true. What he says is always true. Who he is always true. What he does is always right. There is nothing untrue about him. There can't be anything false about him. To be faithful to a vow is to be true to that vow, and that vow represents who you are. He is infinitely and unchangeably true. Good. That which is morally right, desirable, and possessing needed traits for a role can also mean of benefit or advantage to someone. I'm going to suggest that we will never find what we need, what we truly need, outside of him. The Bible says all that's good comes from God. All that's good comes from him. He is, what's kind of hard to grasp in a lot of these, and just looking at God's attributes, is that these aren't things that are just true about him. I can be a joyful guy. I can be a merciful guy. I can be good. I can be strong, whatever. But I am not the embodiment of those things. As human beings, we often describe God as good. But when I say he is good, I'm saying not that good describes him, but that good is defined by him. He is the picture in the dictionary. If he was different, then good would change. Does that make sense? If he was different, then love would be different. Because the words don't describe him, they come from who he is. Okay? We may actually park on this one. God is just. Deuteronomy 32:4 says, "The rock, his work is perfect, for all his ways are justice, a God of faithfulness and without iniquity, just and upright is he." When Romans chapter 1 talks about no man has an excuse, for from the beginning of creation he's made himself evident in what he's created, I'm going to suggest that there are a lot of times where you can see his character in yourself because you were made by him. You were made in his image, and although we are sinful and corrupt, we still bear some marks of our Creator. If you were in a situation where there was a kid in your neighborhood, came from a good home, had plenty of stuff, wasn't hungry, didn't need anything, and he came into your yard and broke into your shed and filled up your lawnmower with kerosene, would you be happy about that? You forgive him. You know, kids do dumb things. About a month later, 3 o'clock in the morning, he shows up at your house with a key, walking down the side of your Buick. What do you feel? Something needs to be done about this. Why? Because it's not fair. It needs to be made right. Insurance companies exist to make sure that the world is somewhat fair. I've been paying hundreds of dollars of insurance for years and years and years. I've never hit a deer. I haven't drove into the ditch in, I don't know. My dad remembers when I drove in the ditch because he pulled me out. And I think, man, I'm paying all this money like for everybody else's accidents. But it's a necessary thing. There has to be a way for things to be made where people don't go into hardship because of a mistake they made in their car. That's fair. Our desire to see things be fair is a part of the nature of God that lives inside of us. When things are unfair, that is just not right. We think of fairness. We think of right and wrong. Your kids, that's not fair. My line, life's not fair. I mean, welcome to reality, okay? Sometimes I mean, my kids will be like, but you let him do that. And I'll just say, well, I like him more. And it's not true all the way. It's, But in this life, I mean, as a parent, let me just throw this out there. Part of your job is to prepare your kids for the unfair world they live in. So if you make everything all fair, their first boss is going to be a rude awakening. They're not going to be fair. Somebody's going to get promoted over them who isn't as good at the job. So what? I mean, that's how life is. But our demand for fair comes from him. Now, let me ask you this. If you saw a story about a guy who got mad over some situation that seemed a little bit petty and he got so enraged that he killed someone, should that person go to prison and pay for that? Okay, let me ask you another question. If you saw them sitting in a courtroom and you suddenly got to watch their life, and you got to know that when they were 4 years old, they lost their mom, and their dad was abusive and didn't raise them, they were never loved, never supported, they were out on their own at 15 years old, went through all kinds of hardship, and they were continually mistreated by people until they were so full of anger that they came to this place. Would your heart have compassion? You may even cry for them, knowing what the story is surrounding this crime. Do they need to spend time in jail? But you feel bad. Do you see where justice and mercy don't have to be alone to exist? All of these traits of God exist completely and always together. When His mercy shows up, His justice doesn't diminish. That's why we have a cross. That's why Jesus didn't just come, live 60, 70 years, die peacefully in His rocking chair, paid for mankind. There was a massive penalty for me that needed to be paid. Because if God just lets sin go, He's no longer fair. And that's impossible because fair is defined by His character. The fair that you demand is who He is. It would be like me saying to Jessica, "You're just not Jessica. Be Jessica. I hate you." That would be dumb. Because I'm telling her what Jessica ought to be. She is Jessica. When we say God is unfair, God is unloving, we are actually telling Him that He is not who He is. What we need to say is that I don't approve of who you are. I wish you were more like me, or what I think you should be. That is humanism. That is making everything revolve around what man wants, and God will never be a God that every selfish person approves of, because He's not selfish. He's not rageful. He's not all the things that we are, because sin exists in us and in our world. So when there comes a time when we butt heads with who God is, guarantee you every time, we're the ones who are at fault, or who cannot possibly see the picture for what it really is. We are a part of His creation. And even the way we reason was created by Him. So finding fault in God is never going to be valid. Having said that, David, the man after God's own heart, wrote in the Psalms all the time, "God, I got a boot mark on my neck from you. How come all the bad guys are doing well and I'm broke? How come all the bad guys are chasing me down? You're not doing anything about it. In fact, you seem to be helping them right now." Do you know God embraced that part of David? God said, "That's the man after my own heart. Screwed up as he is, he's a man after my own heart." David understood that God's love was unchangeable. Yet it was unchangeable. And that's what made him be able to be honest. When God says He's looking for servants who are faithful, I think that's why David was considered faithful, because he was honest. He lived who he really was. As we go into this whole worldview series, and we'll wrap up who God is next week, it's so important that you begin to chew on these things that are true about who God is. He doesn't need you to like Him. But if you never open your heart to who He is, you will never know Him and live a life that's full of who He is and what He has planned for you. But we have to understand that He is perfect. He is holy, set apart, He is not what we are. And the solution is in finding the truth that he is the answer for everything. And the only way things get fixed is when lives get submitted to him and lives begin to live for him. That's where life and peace is found. I don't care what your problem is, life and peace is found in Jesus Christ. The only place. The only place. Oddly enough, the answer to life is death. So until you're willing to lay it down, you're going to fight. You're going to fight a lot. You're going to spin your wheels. You'd be amazed at what he can get done when you just lay it down and let him run your life. Amen. Let's stop here.